Hey, how you doing? Okay, so today we're going to cover a little bit of science that proves that you are getting the best explanation of how our pain and suffering comes to be in our minds, and also a funny little story that also anecdotally proves out what we're teaching. Go. Hey, welcome to the Ion Podcast, where we answer all the questions about spirituality and inner peace that you ever wanted to ask. I am your host, Sean Webb. Okay, so this week I got a couple of things to share with you, one of which being a book. Now, I download a ton of books from Audible, and they sponsor the podcast, and it's awesome because you get a professional voice talent or the author themselves reading you their own words. And where else are you going to get that? They have over 150,000 titles. You can find almost anything there on Audible. It's getting to the point where almost every book out in print now that's worth its weight is showing up on Audible. So if you want to download the application, they have it for Android and or iOS, and it's really awesome. It keeps track of where you are. It syncs between devices. It's really cool. You can listen to a book anywhere, on the way to work, at the gym, out mowing the lawn, whatever. So Antonio Damasio, is probably the world's leading specialist on consciousness and the mind, or at least is up there at the top, and his wife is as well. They're both prestigious PhDs at leading universities doing studies and research and yada, 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 and he's probably had 40 or 50 years in the field. He's written tons of books, and one of his latest books, Self Comes to Mind, Constructing a Conscious Brain, is really cool. It talks about how our consciousness comes into being and where that energy comes from, how it works specifically in the brain, etc. And this was published in 2012. It looks like he copyrighted it in 2010, so which is when he was writing it. But basically, I wanted to share with you a couple of passages that help support that this is the greatest place on the internet for you to be able to understand our human beingness. So, in this next excerpt, we're going to talk about, Antonio talks about the mechanisms for managing and maintaining life, and that they're specifically based on biological value. Okay, and if you remember back, we talked about valuation. Hold on. We talked about the valuation of our attachments. You know, we all have an attachment map. Ego was talked about in episode 5, and basically ego is this sense of self with all its attachments, and when valuation in one of these attachments shifts, or our perception of the valuation shifts, that's when we create all the various emotions and have the various reactions that we have in life. So he's going to talk about biological valuation. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
We shall see that managing and safekeeping life is the fundamental premise of biological value. Biological value has influenced the evolution of brain structures, and in any brain it influences almost every step of brain operations. It is expressed as simply as in the release of chemical molecules related to reward and punishment, or as elaborately as in our social emotions and in sophisticated reasoning. Biological value naturally guides and colors, so to speak, almost everything that happens inside our very minded, very conscious brains. Biological value has the status of a principle.
Okay, so there you go. Antonio Damasio right there saying that valuation, biological value, maintaining value is a basic principle of how our mind and brain works. And if you want to understand exactly how that works, you can go back and listen to the Body, Mind, Spirit 101 again, if you've forgotten it. But basically, we explain how all the attachments come to be and how the valuation shift of these attachments, right? Because our sense of self starts with our body in the center, and so that's the biological value that Damasio is talking about. And when we put on different attachments of mind, like politics, religion, favorite sports teams, the people around us, our family and friends, our expectations about life and our jobs and work and etc., when valuation of one of those things shifts, that's when we have an emotional reaction. So if the valuation increases, we have a positive emotion. If it decreases, then we have a negative emotion. And that excerpt out of that book is Antonio Damasio explaining basically that's a principle of the human brain. That's how it works. So that was kind of cool. The second little excerpt is actually, we don't even have to skip ahead because the next thing he says in the book talks about where consciousness emerges from.
In brief, the conscious mind emerges within the history of life regulation. Life regulation, a dynamic process known as homeostasis for short, begins in unicellular living creatures, such as a bacterial cell or a simple amoeba, which do not have a brain but are capable of adaptive behavior. It progresses in individuals whose behavior is managed by simple brains, as is the case with worms, and it continues its march in individuals whose brains generate both behavior and mind, insects and fish being examples. I am ready to believe that whenever brains begin to generate primordial feelings, and that could be quite early in evolutionary history, organisms acquire an early form of sentience. From there on, an organized self process could develop and be added to the mind, thereby providing the beginning of elaborate conscious minds.
Boom. I am ready to believe that whenever brains begin to generate primordial feelings, organisms acquire an early form of sentience. And he's talking about amoebas. He's talking about single-celled unicellular creatures, right? He's talking about consciousness existing and adaptive behavior existing in single-celled organisms.
I know it is difficult to imagine that the notions of desire and will are applicable to a single lonely cell. How can attitudes and intentions that we associate with the conscious human mind, and that we intuit to result from the workings of big human brains, be present at such an elementary level?
And he is ready to believe that when these single-celled organisms come together, that their consciousness creates the greater consciousness of existence. Now, if you remember back in Body, Mind, Spirit 101, I think it was episode 15 or 16 or maybe 17, we suggested that cells have consciousness. We did so in 2008 versus Damasio writing this book in 2010, publishing it in 2012. Not to say I'm bragging, ooh, look at me, but it is interesting to see one of the world's leading experts in consciousness and mind and brain, and who studied it for 40 or 50 years, is saying the exact same thing as the crazy guy in front of the camera who says God told him. Because basically, if you're talking about my enlightenment experience of episode 20, I explained it as meeting God or whatever. Now, the reality is, okay, when you meet an intelligence or you experience an intelligence greater than your own, which is what I experienced in that seemingly out-of-body experience, you call it God. Whether it's God, an extra consciousness that exists beyond my own, or whether it's I tapped into the cellular consciousness and the cellular intelligence and the intelligence of all that DNA that creates our bodies in 9 months to be able to survive separate from mommy. Maybe I tapped into that intelligence, and that intelligence told me how emotions and the mind and pain and suffering and inner peace and all that stuff works. Maybe I got it from that consciousness within, or maybe I got it from God. Doesn't matter. Wherever I got it, I wasn't a psych PhD, and the conclusions that I'm teaching you are exactly what the world's leading experts who have 40 or 50 years in their field are now just coming to. I think that's very interesting. And I don't say that to say, look at me, I'm special, because guess what? You can do the same thing. The whole reason for this whole podcast is to explain to you, you can do this exact same thing. You can tap into the intelligence that transcends your own, that either exists within your cells themselves or within the mind of God, if you leave your body and go meld with that intelligence. You can do it also. I'm not special. I'm here to tell you I'm just a guide. You can do the same thing through meditation, through other disciplines, through, 8 different types of meditation, through potential psychedelic use, whatever path that you want to use to seize conscious thought within your mind. You will hear what exists just beyond that conscious thought in your mind when that conscious thought ceases. However you do it, however you get there. And you'll understand to an exponentially greater level your own pain and suffering and the things that you need to do to get your life in order to create an immense level of inner peace. Nirvana, as some of the Eastern traditions call it. So, just wanted to point that out. You can get Antonio Damasio's book on Audible. Go pick it up. They have the awesome application that'll run on your iPhone or your iPad or your Android device, and it syncs between devices and all kinds of awesome stuff. Very cool. Okay, so let's get to the funny story that I wanted to share with you. And I may have another story that I want to share as well. But basically, the funny story is that we're having a problem with our preschool in that they're running it like a daycare and not like a school. And so we had a special meeting convened for the parents of this one classroom. We were having an issue with the teacher. We were having multiple issues that we needed to speak through. But one of the issues that we're talking about was that the class is not teaching things that are up to the challenge of the kids in the class, because all the kids, and I don't know whether it's just the problem with the U.S. education system, barely getting kids to read before they graduate, and so we just slowly teach them crap all the way up through graduation, and that's why our preschool curriculum is retarded, scientific use of that word. So the kids in our class are bright. They're all bright. Our son is pretty bright. Our son is 3.5 years old. He's reading. Sorry, I'm not going to apologize for it. It angered, that statement angered some parents in the room, which is the funny thing that we're going to talk about. But he's reading. And so the school is not, they're just teaching right now alphabet and what they call age-appropriate curriculum. Well, the age-appropriate curriculum sucks, in my opinion, and it sucks in the opinions of other people as well. So he's reading words, he knows all the letters of the alphabet, he's sounding out the letters, and he's putting the sounds together, scrunching them together to understand, app is map, oh my goodness. And you see the light turn on, he's not memorizing these words, he's actually figuring the whole process out. Well, he's the only kid in his class that's doing it. So he's only doing it because we got him an iPad with some really cool reading applications that he really loves to play with. They're really interactive. He's learning how to trace the letters and all that other stuff. So he's more advanced in language skills than other kids in his class. And so as an example, my wife brought up that point in the meeting in front of all the other parents. Well, Declan is reading. And you guys are teaching the alphabet. And immediately, the meeting almost becomes sidetracked because the parents of the other children in the room, boom, lean back. They fold their arms in front of their chest, a very defensive posture. And some parents even started saying things in anger based on my wife's statement that, Declan is already reading. Her point was, hey, these kids are smart. My son's already reading and you're teaching the alphabet. And the other parents saw it as, hey, look at my kid. He's so smart. Now, she was surprised that people would get angry at that. Now, I explained to her exactly why that occurred, because you're talking about a number of parents in the room, and we're going to bring up our attachment map here. A number of parents in the room who are all represented by their own attachment maps, right? But their kids are right there near the center of their attachment maps. Their entire sense of self includes being a mommy and being a daddy of this child, and everything that the child does or everything that the child has in its life is now fully ingrained in this parent's existence. And so you're talking about making a statement that's a positive of your kid, but in relation to the positive of your kid, you're now saying, my kid can read, my kid's smarter than your kid is less than my kid. And that's, of course, not what she's saying, but it's what they perceive that she's saying. It's their RP in the equation of emotion, because their expectation or preference is that their kid is smart and intelligent and can do all the things that all the other kids can do. Because that's an extension of their self. They don't want to see their attachment devalued in any way. And then their perception is, this bitch on the other side of the room is bragging on her son being able to read, and my kid can't read. F you. So she was confused on why the parents got angry. And I was like, well, why would you be confused at that? You just basically made a statement that attacked their kids in their mind. Of course, she didn't, and we didn't mean it that way. But because we think all the kids in that class are smart, and we're trying to wrestle the school into teaching a higher level curriculum than what they think they're ready for, because they're ready for a lot more, as proven by, look at the kids in China. And so it was an enigma to Whitney until she came home and explained the whole thing, and then was able to see it from their perspective, because you're talking about the equation of emotion, reality as perceived, perception, right? I saw this the other day on the soccer field. It was a father, and you've seen this. This is a systematic problem within child sports. You have the parent who is just too wrapped up in it and too involved in the game and is being an asshole. So the kid's out there on the field playing his soccer game, and the parent is on the sidelines yelling, "You need to move up, you need to move back, you need to do this, you need to do that, blah, 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 blah." And to the kid's credit, and to probably the kid's mom's credit, he is responding with one sentence: "I'm doing the best I can." But he's doing it in a very frustrated manner, because he's throwing out his arms. He's like, "I'm doing the best I can." To everything his father says, "You need to do this." "I'm doing the best I can." Father ignores that response. "Yeah, but you need to blah, blah, blah." "I'm doing the best I can." "But if you don't blah, 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 then blah, 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 blah." "I'm doing the best I can." And it did shut the father up. So if you have someone in your life who is that type of parent to their child out on the sports field, teach the child to respond with that one sentence, and it will finally shut the parent up. But the reason that whole situation is happening, the parent has an attachment to their child, very close to their sense of self, very close to the center of their sense of self. And their kids' capabilities are reflecting upon their own value. If the kid can't play the sport, all of a sudden that's a reflection on dad. That's a reflection on dad's sense of self. And it happens unconsciously. It's not really dad's fault. It's hardwired into us in an evolutionary fashion to prolong our survival. We just let it go off the tracks when we don't realize that our attachments can go into the cognitive realm. We start defending our cognitive attachments based on what those things are doing and the value of those things. So the dad is wanting the kid to increase dad's value by increasing his capability to play and win the game. So if you want to be an asshole parent, let that happen. But if you do want to be a better parent or a better person in life with knowing someone who does that, get them educated to this. Get them educated to the fact that their kid is not them, and what their kid does isn't a reflection on them. And that will lessen the symptoms of that whole situation. And, even though I felt bad for the kid, he was handling it well, so I didn't say anything to the father, because the father was ultimately shut up by the kid's, "I'm doing the best I can" repetition, which I thought was extremely effective, very cool. But this thing right here, this is how life works. This is where all our pain and suffering comes from, as evidenced by Antonio Damasio's book. Go pick it up at audible.com. It's awesome. You can get it for free if you use our link, audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality. Besides that, I hope you guys are having a great week. I'll talk to you next week. Love you. Peace.